I know a lot of people who watch this channel are also history lovers. And it can be very, very powerful to visit the location of somewhere where a tragedy happened. There's a lot that we can learn from places like Auschwitz and try to understand a little bit more about what the victims of such a tragedy went through. But one has to acknowledge the ethical dilemma that there is in paying money to visit a place that only caused death and pain. So when I found out that the location of the Jonestown massacre was going to be opened to the public next year as a tourist attraction, I feel inclined to remind everyone that this was the site of one of the largest unalivings in history before 9/11. Almost 1,000 people were convinced to unalive themselves by drinking cyanide, all because of what their cult leader told them. So how much does it cost to visit the site of the Jonestown massacre? Just a cool $650 for an overnight experience. Wow, sounds great. So today we are going to do a deep dive into Jim Jones just so that we can remind ourselves about the tragedy and maybe consider whether or not we believe it's ethical to put such a high price tag on a location that harmed so many. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I release about 2 videos every single week on one of these topics, and since next week is a holiday that I like to celebrate, I might only be dropping 1 video, but if I'm feeling kind of crazy this week, I might be able to drop 2. That remains to be seen. But also during the holiday season, I am featuring single parents because I know firsthand how difficult it can be trying to do all of the magical things that are like supposed to happen during this time of the year. And I was raised by a single mom. She made it utterly magical, but I know she was exhausted. She stayed up until like 4 a.m. every Christmas Eve. And then me and my brother were so excited. We would wake up at like 6, and she just had to be so exhausted. She did it all by herself. So today I want to feature the Amazon wish list of another single parent, and hopefully we can come together and help them provide an absolutely wonderful holiday season for their children. So without further ado, let's meet today's parent. Today's parent is Amanda. First off, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to give our kids a kick-butt Christmas. I'm very excited about this chance to be able to give my son all that he needs and wants this year. Thank you. Thank you. I'm a new subscriber and I love listening to your videos while I'm cleaning or working on my crafts. I make clay pendants and beaded necklaces to bring money in. Wow, that's so cool. We do have housing support from family and some food through EBT. Sadly, I just do not bring in enough to give my son everything he needs and wants this year. My strong and independent boy, Leo. He is 12, basically 27, and is such a silly, smart young man, and the physical manifestation of a social butterfly. His favorite thing is hanging out with his friends and family and playing outside. But he is also a big reader and gamer. We love Fortnite, Captain Underpants, Dogman, and Minions. I love dancing and being goofy with him just about every night. He's about 5.5 handfuls and just an awesome kid. Oh, it sounds like you guys have a really sweet relationship. I'm not sure where to begin our story, but I will make it snappy. When I had him, I was battling with addiction and depression and could hardly take care of myself, let alone him. At around the age of 15 months, I gave him to his dad's, no longer in the picture, he just doesn't try, mother to try to take care of him while I took care of myself. Then I battled with 7.5 more years of fighting to see my son and contemplating unaliving myself from being kept from him. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I finally worked up the self-confidence to hire a lawyer and get my son back home. That was 3 years ago this month. Wow, congratulations. We've been working towards healing and his conduct disorder, a trauma response, and managing his ADHD for the last 3 years, and it's been the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but worth every single second. Leo is so much fun and still carries such a strong and caring heart. I am so proud of him and myself for how far he has come since just 3 years ago, and how much he continues to grow and do better each day. I love my son so much, and I am always trying to do better every day for him. Thank you so much again for this opportunity. You are so sweet for doing this. Oh, she goes, P.S. Y'all better subscribe. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, you guys should subscribe. So, he looks like such a sweet kid. Oh my gosh. He does. He looks like he's a goof. I'm not going to share all of these just because I want to protect his identity and all that. But wow. Oh my gosh. And is that you in this last picture? You look cool. I like your hand tattoos. Wow. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your story. I'm going to post the Amazon wishlist down in the pinned comment down below and in the description of this video. So obviously it is not, mandatory or expected, but if you have the means, please consider supporting Amanda and Leo. And without further ado, let's jump into the Jonestown Massacre. This stands as one of the most infamous examples of cult indoctrination and mass tragedy in modern history. The events of November 18th, 1978, was the day that more than 900 followers of Jim Jones died in a remote Guyanese settlement and shocked the world. And it raised a lot of questions about the nature of charismatic leadership, religious fanaticism, and the vulnerabilities of human psychology. So to fully understand how this tragedy unfolded, it's crucial to examine the man himself, Jim Jones, and all of the conditions that led to the creation of Jonestown and the events of that fateful day. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how now the site is going to be transformed into a very strange tourist destination. So Jim Jones was born on May 13th, 1931 in Crete, Indiana. His upbringing was marked by poverty, social isolation, and a fractured family life. His father, James Thurman Jones, was a World War I veteran who suffered from severe health issues that rendered him largely unable to work. As a result, the family struggled financially and relied heavily on Lynetta Putnam, Jim's mother, who was known for her resilience and also for her unorthodox spiritual beliefs. Lynetta's independent and eccentric personality had a very significant influence on Jim, and it fostered in him a sense of defiance against societal norms. Jim's childhood was notably solitary. His family lived on the margins of a small rural community, which contributed to these feelings of isolation within him. But he did find solace in this fascination that he had gained with religion and also the concept of death. And these are themes that would later permeate his rhetoric and his ideology. Neighbors and classmates recalled his behavior, saying that it was unusual. It seemed to include conducting mock funerals for small animals. And these ceremonies often involved long, dramatic sermons delivered by Jim. So on one hand, he did seem to showcase an early talent for oratory, but also an obsession with controlling a crowd and having some kind of ritual surrounding him. Now, while his father's illness kept him distant, Lynetta encouraged Jim's interests in spirituality and social justice, albeit in a way that was unconventional for the time. She instilled in him a belief that he was destined for greatness, often describing him as a very special child with a higher purpose. So you can only imagine the ego that this young man had growing within him. Now, this belief in his unique destiny definitely contributed to Jim's growing sense of self-importance and later, probably, to his claims of divine authority. Now, in addition to this fascination with religion, young Jim was deeply affected by the racial inequalities that he observed in the segregated Midwest. He reportedly befriended African American children in his neighborhood despite the prevailing racial prejudices of the era. This early exposure to social injustice planted the seeds for his later advocacy for civil rights, though it also became one of his primary tools that he used to manipulate the people within his ministry. But more on that later. And I'm obviously not Gen Z, but it's giving white savior complex. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I don't think so because he encouraged 1,000 people almost to themselves. So I think he had some kind of complex. Now, Jim's teenage years were marked by a voracious appetite for reading, particularly books on leadership, power, and socialism. Works by figures like Karl Marx and Mahatma Gandhi influenced his developing worldview, blending themes of collective welfare with revolutionary zeal. This intellectual curiosity, combined with his natural charisma and theatrical tendencies, set the stage for his future role as a leader who could inspire both devotion and fear in equal measure. After graduating from high school, Jones briefly attended Indiana University before transferring to Butler University, where he earned a degree in secondary education. During this period, he began exploring opportunities to preach, initially within the Pentecostal tradition. His early sermons were electrifying, combining emotional fervor with a message of social equality and justice. Jones's ability to connect with disenfranchised individuals became a cornerstone of his ministry, drawing followers who felt marginalized by mainstream society. But was he really helping them or exploiting them? Now, obviously, Jones's early career as a pastor was marked by his charisma and his commitment to racial integration. In 1955, he founded the Wings of Deliverance Church in Indianapolis, which was later renamed the People's Temple. From its inception, the church was defined by its progressive values, particularly its commitment to racial equality. At a time when segregation was still entrenched in American society, the People's Temple was one of the few religious institutions that openly welcomed people of all races. Jones's sermons emphasized unity and social justice, resonating deeply with African Americans and other marginalized groups who sought a sense of belonging. And to grow his church, Jones employed a multifaceted approach that combined innovative outreach methods, social services, and also strategic marketing. He frequently preached in public spaces, including street corners, where he would deliver these impassioned speeches that would end up drawing large crowds. These outdoor sermons often focused on themes of racial and economic justice, delivered with a very theatrical flair that seemed to captivate passerby. Jones's dynamic and emotional preaching style, which included shouting, dramatic pauses, and moments of profound vulnerability, created a powerful connection with his audience. In addition to public preaching, Jones utilized unconventional recruitment tactics. He performed so-called faith healings during church services, claiming to possess divine powers to cure illnesses. These performances, often staged with the help of church insiders posing as sick individuals, convinced many attendees that he had supernatural abilities. Such display of these miracles not only boosted attendance to his church, but solidified Jones's authority as a spiritual leader and divine being. The People's Temple also provided tangible benefits that attracted members. The church established programs to feed the hungry, house the homeless, and care for the sick. For many, these acts of charity were a literal lifeline, offering practical support in times of need. And Jones framed these services as expressions of the church's moral mission, and this further committed followers to the community. The temple's reputation at this time as a whole was a force of social good, and this made it particularly appealing to those disillusioned with traditional religious institutions or even American society itself at the time. So when we talk about cults, we always want to talk about what drew people in, because even though tragedy happens and terrible things happen, and maybe not necessarily in this cult, but in many, they seem to have some shocking, alarming, otherworldly belief systems that on the outside seem, not to use this word because I hate to use this word, but from the outside seem just crazy. Like, what is really going on here? But This group did, at least in the beginning, have a goal to do good in the community. And there is room for debate on whether Jim Jones's intention from the get-go was to actually be a force of good in the world, or whether he saw an opportunity to gain control and power and money from followers, all under the disguise of him being like a social justice warrior. But I'm really curious to know what you guys think, because he had a keen ability to inspire loyalty in his followers, and this was rooted in his skillful use of rhetoric and psychology. He often portrayed himself as a martyr, fighting against a corrupt and oppressive system, positioning the church as effectively a sanctuary from a whole world that was filled with injustice. Clever little us versus them tactic right there. His sermons frequently blended biblical references with socialist ideology and presented this vision of a utopian society where everyone was equal under God. And this message deeply resonated with many people who were experiencing inequality and even societal or violent threats. So as the congregation grew, Jones's ambitions began to expand. He started to incorporate elements of socialism into his teachings and framed the People's Temple as the prototype for a utopian society. So this vision was particularly appealing to those followers who were feeling like life really wasn't fair. People were working twice as hard as their white counterparts and not even getting close to seeing the amount of respect that they deserved. There was still so much segregation in the country, so people who felt like finally someone was fighting for them might be drawn into this group. Because Jones skillfully blended religious fervor with political ideology and created a sense of purpose that totally transcended any traditional faith. But as his influence grew, so did the controversies. Reports began to surface about financial improprieties, coercion, and the staged nature of those faith healings. Critics started to accuse Jones of manipulating vulnerable individuals for personal gain, though he tried to dismiss these claims as attacks by enemies of his movement. Yeah, because when you force people to live communally and everyone only has the resources that they can bring in, but you, the man at the helm, doesn't have to be the one to provide any resources, you actually gain more resources and finances. Yeah, of course, people are just attacking you for doing so much good. Give me a break. But despite all of this, the controversies and the local outrage, I suppose, did little to deter his most loyal followers, many of whom saw him as a persecuted visionary. Now, I think we've all seen these pictures of Jim Jones, of him wearing the dark sunglasses because allegedly he had so much power exuding from his eyes. Well, it was the 1960s when he began to wear these sunglasses during his sermons and public appearances, and this did become one of his most signature traits. It added an air of mystery and authority to his persona. Now, he claimed that these sunglasses were necessary to shield his eyes from bright lights. Other people suggest that he was trying to use these sunglasses to hide the effects of fatigue or very, very red eyes from a lot of drug use. But other people seem to believe that the glasses symbolized a deliberate effort to cultivate this image of power and otherworldly insight, further enhancing his mystique as a spiritual leader. I've also seen some reports where people say like, oh, he just had so much power being absorbed through the eyes and sent out through the eyes that he had to shield himself from the energy of the people around him. It's convoluted, culty, woo-woo jargon, but as far as I know, he was doing a lot of drugs. Now, in the late 1960s, Jones ended up relocating the People's Temple to California, which at the time seemed to be like the mecca of cults and cultic activity. He believed that the state's progressive atmosphere and larger population would provide more fertile ground for his vision of this utopia. He established churches in Ukiah, San Francisco, and Los Angeles because each of these cities were centers of social activism and political influence. The temple's members worked tirelessly on projects that aligned with Jones's ideals, including voter registration drives, community health clinics, and advocacy for racial and economic justice. However, the move to California also marked the beginning of greater scrutiny and controversy. As the temple's influence grew, so did its reputation for secrecy and control. Former members had began to come forward with disturbing accounts of their experiences. They detailed physical abuse, emotional manipulation, and even exploitation. Many described being subjected to public shaming rituals for perceived disobedience and being forced to sign false confessions of misconduct or leave behind their personal assets upon joining the temple, or all of the above. So now these false confessions were basically collateral, and they were used by Jones against his followers as leverage to ensure silence and obedience. So obviously this fostered not just an atmosphere of fear and dependency, but also total control and lack of trust among other disciples. Now, investigative journalists and watchdog groups started to expose financial irregularities within the organization. Now, as I've hinted at before, and like every other cult, the temple controlled its members' income and assets, often requiring them to hand over paychecks and savings to prove their loyalty. These funds were then allegedly used to finance Jones's lavish lifestyle and to expand the temple's operations, although we don't fully know the exact extent of financial mismanagement. But considering the state of the compound in Guyana, Jones was definitely hoarding that money. So, with public scrutiny growing and growing, so did Jones's paranoia. He believed that the government, the media, and all of his ex-followers were conspiring against him and the temple. So he frequently accused external forces of racism and persecution, and then he used this to rally his followers and justify increasing control over their lives. Armed guards became a common presence at temple events, and Jones's speeches started to take on an apocalyptic tone that warned of imminent attacks and even urged members to prepare for absolutely catastrophic scenarios. Unless, of course, they joined or committed to the cult. Now, this heightened scrutiny culminated in some legal challenges and even investigations by local and federal authorities. Former members started filing lawsuits alleging abuse and coercion, while those journalists published exposés that painted the temple as a dangerous cult. So, Jones was getting a lot of negative attention, and this negative attention really strained a lot of the relationships that Jones had built with some political allies, and obviously this all undermined his carefully crafted image as this humanitarian leader. So these pressures, combined with his deteriorating mental health at the time, possibly due to drug use, and combined with escalating drug use, he decided that he needed to escape from the intensifying scrutiny. So we have this man painting this picture of utopia, right? And he's getting to the point where he's going to have to flee the country, most likely because of the legal issues at hand. So instead of him just leaving and getting out of there, he convinced his followers to move to Guyana, where he created Jonestown. So in 1974, Jones leased land in Guyana, which is a small South American country, and tried to establish what he would describe as a socialist paradise, free from the corruption and racism of the United States. So, of course, the relocation was framed as a strategic move to protect the community from those external threats and to create a sanctuary where his vision of utopia could flourish without interference. And the Guyanese government, eager to attract foreign investment and very sympathetic to Jones's socialist rhetoric, granted the temple significant autonomy in developing the settlement. They were basically like, do your thing, buddy. So Jones's decision to move to Guyana was also influenced by his desire to try to consolidate control over his followers. I mean, we've seen it in cult after cult. For some reason, they always end up fleeing to Costa Rica or some other country where there's a lot of expansive space and they can buy or rent property and bring all of their followers there and then have no laws. But what it really is just fleeing from the United States so they don't have to take accountability for the bad things that they're doing. By relocating to a remote jungle location, he could isolate his entire community from external influences and dissenting voices. He wanted total and utter control. He did not want anyone in his following to think for themselves. And this isolation made it easier for Jones to maintain an atmosphere of obedience and loyalty because the members had such little access to outside information or support systems. So Jonestown was envisioned as a self-sufficient agricultural commune where members of the People's Temple could live in harmony and equality. So over the next several years, hundreds of followers migrated to Guyana. They left behind their possessions, families, and former lives. And don't worry, Jim Jones was also sending propaganda to all of his followers back home, making this place look like this beautiful, loving eco-village where people were just living freely and happily. But despite its utopian promise, the reality of Jonestown was far more grim. So the settlement faced significant logistical challenges, including inadequate housing, poor sanitation, and insufficient food supplies. Members were subjected to grueling labor in the oppressive tropical climate with little opportunity for rest or recreation. I mean, hundreds of people were creating a new community. On the surface, this idea sounds so wonderful. It's so easy to romanticize the idea of, we're going to join a commune, we'll teach our children together, we'll all have jobs, we'll all work together, we'll grow our own food, we'll sleep communally, we'll be one big chosen family. All of that sounds wonderful until you realize, now I'm doing free labor and I've poured all of my money into this commune with all of these essentially strangers that I now live with. So someone's job has to be to grow the food. Someone's job has to be to find a space where we all use the restroom. Someone's job has to be cleaning all of that. These logistics are things that I think a lot of these cult leaders and the followers don't really consider because the idea of it sounds so good and sweet and beautiful. But there's a reason that certain areas of the world, our modern day society, there are reasons why they operate the way that they do, because they've been solutions to these types of challenges. And the remote location of Jonestown posed some really unique challenges as well. Supplies for the people living there had to be transported from distant towns, and the dense jungle environment made agricultural success very difficult. Crops were failing, and the settlement's over-reliance on imported goods created this constant state of scarcity. Malnutrition and disease were very common, exacerbating the physical and emotional strain on the community that was already pretty prevalent. And Jones's leadership became increasingly authoritarian and erratic. He had become addicted to amphetamines, barbiturates, and this all fueled his paranoia, but also his delusions of grandeur. So he would stage these public drills called White Nights, during which followers were told to prepare for a mass unaliving event to prove their loyalty. So unlike Heaven's Gate, where unaliving yourself is the path to enlightenment and heaven, like it is the gate to heaven, here you have to prove that you're loyal to God, essentially, by unaliving yourself. So these events that he would hold were framed as rehearsals for defending the community from external threats. So people were just constantly fearful, and some people don't realize this, but there are two emotions that human beings, when they get into these two emotions, are the most easy to control, and that is if they're anger or if they're scared. because the leader has created some kind of common enemy. So if you can rally a ton of people around you to be afraid of one thing, you are so much more easily able to control those people. And control he did. Strict surveillance and control dominated life in Jonestown. There were armed guards that patrolled the perimeter that ensured that not only could no one enter, but nobody could leave without Jones's permission. Letters and communications with the outside world were all monitored, and any dissent or any negative press from within the compound was met with severe consequences, including beatings or solitary confinement. And Jones, because he loved to talk, he would have nightly meetings to deliver these lengthy, vitriolic monologues that warned of these conspiracies against the temple. So it just further isolated all of these members because they were being so heavily monitored. And Jim Jones wasn't going to let any of them reach out to their family members and tell them how terrible it was there. Absolutely not. But despite all of this, many of the followers remained committed, and they believed that Jonestown represented their best chance at building a better world. Jim Jones's charisma and manipulation continued to inspire loyalty, even as the community's conditions deteriorated. Now, by the late 1970s, Jonestown had become a microcosm of Jones's authoritarian rule, with dire consequences for everyone who lived there. But this would not last much longer. By 1978, reports of human rights abuses and forced confinement in Jonestown had finally reached the U.S. government. Relatives of temple members who were really concerned about their loved ones lobbied Congress for an investigation. Now, in response, Congressman Leo Ryan of California, who was known for his hands-on approach to addressing constituent concerns, decided, you know what? I'm going to go down and visit Jonestown personally. Now, Ryan's visit was seen as this last-ditch effort to investigate the troubling reports and bring back any willing members of the cult back to the United States. They brought reporters with them, and you know that they were planning on reporting back to the government about what was going on in Jonestown, and obviously Jim Jones saw all of this as a major threat. Ryan arrived in Guyana on November 14, 1978, and he was accompanied by a delegation of journalists, legal advisors, and concerned family members of Jonestown residents. The group initially met with officials from the Guyanese government and the People's Temple before traveling all the way to Jonestown on November 17th. Jim Jones and his followers welcomed this group with a very carefully staged presentation of life in the commune. Residents were forced to appear happy, healthy, unified, singing songs and offering some glowing testimonials about their lives there in Jonestown. However, cracks in the facade quickly began to show. Members who were dissatisfied or fearful of Jones's rule discreetly started passing notes to members of Ryan's group, and they were pleading for help to leave Jonestown. One such note handed to NBC reporter Don Harris said, quote, "Please help us get out of Jonestown," unquote. As the day progressed, more individuals came forward expressing their desire to escape. And thank goodness they did. Thank goodness they found the bravery to slip those notes. By the morning of November 18th, approximately 15 temple members had decided to leave with Ryan's group, but most others were too afraid to publicly express their wishes to leave. So Jones is incensed, he's paranoid and agitated, and he viewed all of these defections as an intense betrayal and a direct threat to his authority. So he attempted to dissuade those who wanted to leave by delivering an impassioned speech about loyalty, and then accused Ryan and the rest of the group of conspiring against the temple. But thank goodness, despite those efforts, the defectors remained resolute, and Ryan's group decided that they were going to depart. Now, this is where things begin to get a lot more dark. So Ryan and the journalists who traveled with him are escorting all the people who want to leave to an airstrip at Port Kituma. And they are ready to finally go home. But this airstrip was armed by temple members, and they decided to launch an ambush. They opened fire on the group as they tried to board the 2 small planes that would take them home. These temple members killed Ryan, NBC reporter Don Harris, photographer Greg Robinson, and temple defectors. Leo Ryan's staff member Jackie Spire was gravely injured, but survived by pretending that they were dead. Now, back in Jonestown, Jones, who had planned the attack clearly and was very, very aware that there would be repercussions because of the ambush, decided to collect all of his followers into the central pavilion to make a speech. He declared that the community was under attack, even though he had just directed followers to go murder people who were just trying to be helpful, just trying to bring these people back home to their families. He told his entire community that in order to avoid any retribution or this attack, as he was calling it, that they had to carry out what he would call a revolutionary act. And this was the moment he would introduce over 900 people to his idea of a mass unaliving, because he considered it a form of protest against oppression. So he encouraged all of these people to drink a cyanide-laced concoction of Flavor Aid and sedatives. You know the saying, don't drink the Kool-Aid? There's a reason why people consider it so offensive, because this man literally did convince people, infants and children and their parents and their caregivers to unalive themselves by drinking this poison. He forced the parents to give it first to their children, which, what kind of torture is that on a parent, let alone the child? I mean, when the children drank the cyanide, it was clearly painful. People were crying, screaming. There is actually, and I will not play it here. I personally don't recommend seeking it out, but there is an actual recording of this whole event, and it is utterly heartbreaking. You can hear the pain. You can hear the pain that people are experiencing in drinking this. So these parents are administering this poison to their children, seeing their children have a painful, painful death. And if they start to feel like afraid to drink this mixture and don't voluntarily drink it, they were coerced at gunpoint by Jones's armed enforcers. So if they tried to resist, heavily armed guards ensured that they complied. And those who even attempted to escape were literally hunted down and killed. It wasn't just 900 people unaliving themselves. Jim Jones had his cohorts kill the people that resisted. More than 900 people perished, including 300 children. And you know what is the most frustrating part of this and makes me really think Jim Jones is just a expletive coward? He watches all of these people torment themselves. He sees how painful it is to drink this poison because he's watching people suffer for hours. And like the coward he is, he shot himself in the head instead of actually drank the cyanide. Like, you have to be a special brand of messed up to watch hundreds of people suffer at your hand, at your coercion, and be so much of a coward that you're afraid to put yourself through that amount of pain. It's despicable. This massacre was broadcast through the world through graphic photos and reports, and it became the largest loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until the September 11 attacks in 2001. This massacre sent shockwaves around the world. I mean, people saw images of the dead laying in rows amid the jungle, and these images became indelible symbols of the dangers of cults and charismatic leaders. And the U.S. government even faced criticism for its delayed response and perceived indifference about the warnings about Jones's behavior. And in the wake of tragedy, these survivors grappled with immense trauma and stigma. People had lost their entire families. and others had to reconcile their past beliefs with the horrific reality of what happened at Jonestown. This event, as tragic as it was, did spur widespread public interest in trying to understand cult dynamics. And it did lead to increased scrutiny of similar groups, and it also led to the development of some deprogramming techniques, which is something. But one just cannot ignore this tragedy. The fact that people who were traveling to this compound to try to save the lives of these innocent victims of the cult were gunned down by supporters of the cult, on top of the fact that then Jim Jones, because he was such a coward, forced everybody to unalive themselves simply because he couldn't take accountability for what he did. Why couldn't those people just leave? You would rather watch all of these people die in front of you and die yourself instead of take accountability and go to jail and let these people go back home to their families? That's next level cult leader. Like, this man was so royally messed up. It's one of those things that it's so hard when you like sit and you research it and you watch the docuseries and you try to put yourself in that position of getting involved in a group like this, or even trying to understand why people get so obsessed with things like power and control. And this is one of those situations where I'm like, I cannot wrap my head around, why can't you just go to jail and let people walk free? Because this outcome is worse. You're remembered for something way worse. It's just so interesting that someone can be so blinded by their desire for control and power that they'd rather go down in history as a cult leader who coerced almost 1,000 people to hurt themselves, unalive themselves, rather than go to jail and let everybody walk free to talk about you for the rest of your life. Because this is worse. This is worse to me. I'm sure we all know I could rant about this for a while, and I'm going to try to keep myself grounded here. And let's talk about what Jonestown is like today. So the site of Jonestown, which was once that bustling settlement, is now just desolate and overgrown. Now, the Guyanese government did initially raze much of the settlement, but there's still remnants of the community that still remain. Over the years, the site has become this kind of grim tourist destination for people who are interested in darker history. Now, people who have visited Jonestown often describe the experience as haunting and sobering. There are guided tours that are offered by local operators to provide insight into the rise and fall of the People's Temple, as well as the personal stories of those who lived and died there. Memorials have been erected to honor the victims in order to try to serve as a reminder of the human cost of unchecked power and blind obedience. But what about this new high price ticket of visiting Jonestown? Recent developments indicate that Guyana is considering transforming the Jonestown site into an actual legit tourist attraction instead of like a remote location that people can go visit if they want. The Guyana Tourism Authority has allegedly launched what they're calling the Jonestown Memorial Tour. And the goal is to try to combine history, culture with the natural beauty of the area. So this tour includes exploring Jonestown, engaging with local residents at the Port Kaituma Market, and hearing firsthand accounts from witnesses of the tragic event. However, as you can imagine, the proposal has sparked mixed reactions. Critics, including survivors and their families, argue that such initiatives may actually disrespect the victims and reopen old wounds. Former Congresswoman Jackie Speier, a survivor of the Jonestown attack, the one who pretended to be dead and she ended up surviving the siege, she expressed concerns over the plan. But conversely, proponents, including Guyana's tourism authorities, believe that with sensitivity, the site can serve as an educational resource similar to those other dark tourism locations like Auschwitz. Now, the project is still in its preliminary stages, and it faces a lot of logistical and financial challenges. significant investment would be required to make the site accessible and informative for visitors. And as discussions continue, the balance between memorializing the past and promoting tourism remains a central concern. However, it is still set to open next year, and for a cool $650, you'll get to have an overnight experience, which just feels really insensitive to me. It's one thing to want to invite people to learn about the dangers of cult dynamics and cult leaders and have it be a really great educational spot where the history is shared. But unfortunately, it seems like it's only going to be able to be educational for those at a certain economic bracket. But I'm really curious to know what you would think. Would you go visit for $650? I don't think I would. Now, the Jonestown massacre remains a cautionary tale about the perils of authoritarianism, isolation, and ideological extremism. Jim Jones's rise to power was rooted in genuine concerns for social justice and equality, but his descent into paranoia and megalomania led to one of the most devastating tragedies in modern history. By examining the factors that contributed to this event and its aftermath, we can gain a lot of insight into the vulnerabilities of human psychology and the importance of vigilance against the forces of manipulation and control. Today, I don't even want to call it a legacy, but the history of Jonestown serves not only as a reminder of the fragility of trust, but also as a call to question and resist any force that seeks to exploit it. I'm really curious about what you think about this tourist attraction that's opening or might open. Obviously, we don't have any real control over what happens, but maybe if we talk about it more publicly and openly, some kind of change can be made. But I'm really curious to know what you all think. And the thing is, I know that I barely scratched the surface in this video. I might make a longer one that details a little bit more about more daily practices, shares more stories. But let me know if you have any insight into this cult, because I would love to hear from anyone that has any personal experience, either you or a loved one that survived or got involved in some way. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. I know this is like a really dark topic to talk about, but on a lighter note, harsh transition here. Don't forget to click on Amanda's Amazon wish list. I know her and her son Leo would really, really appreciate your support this holiday season. And please take care of yourselves, everybody. Thank you all so, so much for supporting the channel, supporting each other. And please, as always, let's keep it respectful in the comments. I love a good, healthy debate, but let's just avoid any ad hominem attacks or anything too abrasive or harsh. Let's try to I want everyone to share their own different opinions. I think that's really, really important. I couldn't be a anti-cult channel if I didn't want everyone to share their opinions about what we're talking about, because I think that allows us to have growth and expansion. But just be respectful to one another. Thank you guys so much. And if you made it this far, please leave a black heart in the comments. That way I know that you're watching the whole thing. And thank you so much again. So as always, guys, stay safe out there. Always ask questions and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Thank you all so much. Bye.